She moved through the cafe with quiet precision, carrying plates, filling cups, and answering orders without complaint. The small bell above the door rang constantly, letting her know a new customer had come in. But she had long stopped noticing the patterns of footsteps and conversations. She had worked here for years, and every day felt the same. People came and went, but no one really saw her. She smiled politely, served coffee, and kept moving, trying to stay invisible. Life had been like this for a long time, and she had learned to accept it. Most days. The cafe was just a place to work and make money, not a place of joy. She woke up early, hurried to get ready, and caught the bus that smelled faintly of oil and wet pavement. Her uniform always felt too stiff, and the shoes pinched her feet after a few hours. By the time the morning rush began, she was already tired, but she forced herself to keep going. She had bills to pay, a small apartment to rent, and a family who depended on her. There was no room for dreams that could not feed her or keep her warm. Even when the customers were kind, she felt a distance. They would say thank you or have a good day, but their words floated past her. Sometimes she wondered if anyone had ever noticed the way she moved, the way she smiled politely, or the way her hands shook slightly when she was tired. Most people only saw Waitress, nothing more, nothing less, and she liked it that way. Being unnoticed was easier. It kept her safe, but inside her, there was another world, a quiet, private world that no one else knew existed. Music had always been her secret. As a child, she had spent hours tapping on the old piano her parents had brought home when she was very young. Her fingers had been clumsy at first, often missing keys, but she remembered the thrill of making a sound that seemed to belong to her alone. Her parents had been too busy to notice how quickly she had improved, and her siblings were too loud to pay attention. So she practiced in secret, letting music be her escape from a world that often felt heavy and unfair. Even now. Years later, she kept music in her life quietly. In the tiny apartment she rented, there was a small keyboard tucked into a corner. It was not fancy, but it made the right sounds. And when she played, she felt something that was impossible to find anywhere else. She could lose herself in the keys, letting her thoughts float and her emotions flow. The music spoke when words could not. When life pressed down too hard, and she felt free, even for just a few moments, her co-workers often talked about their plans for the weekend or the people they had met, but she rarely joined in. She had learned that most conversations left her feeling more tired than happy. It was easier to work quietly, to keep her head down, and to let her world remain private. Still, she noticed little things, the way a customer lingered too long by the counter, the way someone laughed a little too loudly, or the way a tip was left on the table with a name scribbled on it. These details were small, almost meaningless to others, but she remembered them. Her mind always paid attention to details. Some days were harder than others. The cafe could be crowded, and the work relentless. She moved quickly between tables, balancing trays, taking orders, and answering questions about the menu. People sometimes complained, sometimes ignored her entirely, and other times praised her efficiency. But no matter what happened, she held herself together. It was part of her routine. Do the work, smile politely, stay out of trouble, go home, and sleep, only to wake up and do it all again. Life had become a rhythm, predictable and safe. And she had convinced herself that she liked it that way. Yet even in the middle of these long, tiring days, her mind often wandered. She imagined melodies and harmonies, sounds that danced between her fingers, even when she had no instrument in front of her. She hummed quietly when she could, letting the music follow her through the busy cafe. No one noticed. No one needed to. It was hers alone, and it gave her strength. Sometimes, when a customer asked her a question she had already answered, she smiled and repeated herself patiently. But in those moments, she also felt a quiet anger or frustration that the world did not seem to notice how capable, smart, or talented she could be. People judged her only by her role, only by her uniform, and not by the person she was underneath. But she had learned to ignore it. She could not waste energy changing the opinions of strangers. It was safer, easier, and in its own way, peaceful, to remain unseen. She did not have close friends at work. Most people were polite enough, but she had discovered that friendships often brought complications she could not afford. Gossip, jealousy, competition, all. These things distracted from what was important: her work, her family, and her music. She spent lunch breaks alone, sometimes with her small notebook in which she wrote down melodies she remembered or rhythms that came to her mind. She wrote down fragments of songs, small sketches of music, hoping that someday she could turn them into something bigger. Her family sometimes asked her why she did not play more publicly, why she did not take her music seriously. But she always had excuses. Life was busy. She had bills to pay. There was no stage big enough, no audience ready for her. The truth was more complicated. She was afraid. Afraid that if people really heard her, they would not understand. Afraid that she would fail. Afraid that her secret world would be exposed and judged. So she kept playing only in private, in the quiet of her room, or in her imagination as she moved through the cafe, carrying trays of coffee and plates of food, even on the slow days. When the cafe was nearly empty, she never let herself relax fully. She moved from table to table, cleaning, refilling water, and straightening chairs. Sometimes she paused for a moment, looking out the window at the streets outside. Children played on the sidewalks, dogs ran with their owners, and people walked quickly, lost in their own lives. She watched them for a while, wondering if they ever felt as invisible as she sometimes did. Then she shook her head, returned to her work, and continued her rhythm. Knowing that the world outside the cafe had little to do with her life inside it, money was always tight. She had learned to budget carefully, stretching every paycheck to cover rent, food, and small necessities. There was no room for luxuries, no room for vacations, no room for indulgence. And yet she managed. She found small joys in simple things: the warmth of a cup of tea, the laughter of a child outside the window, the feeling of her fingers moving over piano keys, even if only in her mind. These little things kept her going, kept her moving, kept her dreaming. And then there were moments that reminded her that life could change unexpectedly. Sometimes a customer would leave a generous tip or say a word of encouragement. Sometimes a coworker would smile or share a small kindness. These moments were rare, but they were enough to make her feel connected, even for a moment. They reminded her that even though most people did not see her, there were sparks of recognition and warmth in the world, waiting for her to notice them. She worked late into the evenings. By the time the cafe emptied, she was exhausted. But she still had one final task: cleaning the floor, wiping down counters, and making sure everything was ready for the next day. Then she would pack her small bag, leave the cafe, and walk to the bus stop. Her uniform slightly wrinkled, her shoes scuffed, and her hair falling loosely around her shoulders. The streets were quieter now, lit by the yellow glow of street lamps. The night air was cool against her skin, and she would take a few deep breaths, enjoying the brief moment of solitude before returning to her tiny apartment. Once home, she would change into comfortable clothes, make a simple dinner, and sit at her small keyboard. She would play, letting the music carry her far away from the stress and exhaustion of the day. The sounds filled the room, wrapping around her like a warm blanket. She could lose herself in the melodies, imagining a life that was brighter, freer, and full of possibility. Even if it was only for an hour or two, it was enough. And every night, as she lay in bed, she thought about the life she wanted but never dared to chase. She thought about music, about performance, and about the possibility that one day someone might hear her and understand. But she also reminded herself that dreams were dangerous. They could bring hope and disappointment in the same moment. It was safer to remain quiet, to remain unnoticed, and to let her music be her secret strength. Still, deep down, she felt a quiet hope. She did not know when or how, but she sensed that something could change. Life might not always be this repetitive, exhausting cycle. There could be a moment, unexpected and sudden, when the world shifted, and she could step out of the shadows. She just did not know when that moment would come. For now, she moved through her days with quiet determination, carrying trays and filling cups, listening to the hum of the cafe, and keeping her music alive in her heart. No one could see her talent. No one could guess the depth of her world. But she knew it was there, waiting for the right moment to emerge. And in that quiet certainty, she found strength enough to face another day, enough to keep dreaming, and enough to hope that the life she imagined could one day become real. The cafe was busier than usual that evening. The small space was filled with chatter, the clinking of cups and plates, and the faint aroma of freshly baked pastries. She moved between the tables, carrying a tray of sandwiches to a family in the corner, smiling, politely answering questions and taking orders. It was a Friday night, and the regular rhythm of work had shifted into something chaotic and hurried. Customers came in waves, some laughing, some in a rush, some distracted by their phones. She hardly noticed them individually anymore. They were part of the background she had grown used to. It was during this busy evening that something unexpected happened. The cafe had planned a small musical performance. A local musician who often played the piano in the corner, adding warmth and atmosphere to the space. Everyone knew him, and everyone expected the music to drift softly through the room while they sipped their coffee and talked quietly. But tonight he was late. The clock ticked closer to the scheduled start time, and he was nowhere to be seen. A few customers grumbled. The manager looked stressed, pacing near the counter. Checking his phone every few seconds, she watched from a distance. Carrying a tray of drinks, feeling the tension in the room. Part of her thought, it's just a piano performance. Nothing terrible will happen if it's late. But another part of her felt a spark of something familiar, longing she had buried deep inside herself. She remembered the hours she had spent at the small keyboard in her apartment, the melodies she had created, the songs she had imagined in her mind. Her fingers itched with the memory of movement over keys, the sound filling a room, the feeling of music taking over everything else. Her coworker, friendly but talkative woman, nudged her gently. "Why don't you just play? No one else is here, and the manager looks like he's about to have a heart attack." The suggestion startled her. She had never considered it. The piano was big, polished, and real far from the small keyboard she had at home. People would see her. People would listen. People would judge. Her heart beat faster at the thought. But she also felt something else. A quiet thrill, the kind she had only known in her private practice sessions when she let herself dream without fear. "Are you serious?" she asked, trying to hide the sudden excitement in her voice. "Yes," her coworker said with a grin. "Just go. You know you can do it. Maybe tonight's the night the cafe gets more than just coffee." The manager looked over, desperation in his eyes. "We need someone. It's now or never. Can you try?" His tone was nervous, but there was a hint of hope as well. He didn't know she could play, but the timing was perfect or perhaps impossible. She hesitated. Every instinct told her to stay safe, to remain invisible, to carry trays and refill cups like she always did. But another instinct, deeper and stronger, told her this might be her moment. She took a deep breath, nodded, and walked toward the corner where the grand piano stood. Her shoes made soft sounds on the wooden floor, and the room seemed to notice her movement. Conversations paused briefly. People glanced toward her, curious, some skeptical, some amused. She could feel their eyes, and for a moment, panic threatened to take over. She sat on the bench, adjusting the height slightly, and rested her hands over the keys. They were smooth, cold, and real, unlike the small keyboard she was used to at home. She closed her eyes for a second, took another deep breath, remembered the countless hours she had spent alone, learning, imagining, and perfecting. The first note she pressed trembled slightly, and she almost pulled back. But she didn't. She pressed again, letting the sound fill the room, simple at first, almost cautious. Then she began to play. The melody grew, soft and hesitant, then confident. Her fingers moved with precision she hadn't known anyone would see. She had played for herself for years, but now her music had an audience. She noticed the murmurs of surprise, the pause in conversations, the way people stopped moving, as if the sound had reached some unexpected corner of their hearts. It was a moment she had imagined countless times, but now it was real at first. A few people laughed quietly, thinking it might be awkward or funny to see a waitress at the piano. Some whispered to each other, I didn't know she could play." But as the notes filled the air, their expressions changed. The laughter faded. The whispers stopped. Every sound she made seemed to pull the room into itself, quieting the chatter, slowing the clock, and focusing everyone's attention on the music. Her heart raced, but she did not stop. Each note was precise, emotional, and honest. She let herself feel every sound, letting the music speak when words could not. She saw people leaning forward in their chairs, some closing their eyes, some tapping fingers lightly on the table. One child tilted their head, mesmerized by the sound, unable to understand why it felt so important. A few older customers whispered to each other, exchanging looks of disbelief. They had never expected this from someone they had seen only as a waitress. For years, she had carried herself through the cafe as invisible, unnoticed and unremarkable, and now, with every chord, she revealed a part of herself that no one had ever seen. Her coworker stood near the counter, her eyes wide and her mouth slightly open. She had always known her friend could play, but this was something else entirely. The music was not just skill, it was soul. It was experience, emotion, and life poured into sound. She could see the surprise and admiration growing in the faces around her. Even the manager had stopped pacing, leaning slightly on the counter, holding his hands together as he listened. She played longer than she expected. Each piece she imagined in her mind came alive under her fingers. She added small flourishes, little improvisations she had never dared to try in front of anyone before. The cafe seemed to hold its breath, as if the music itself had created a bubble of silence and attention around her. Time slowed. The sound of cups, the chatter, the clatter of plates all faded. There was only the piano and the story it told. For a moment, she felt as if she was not a waitress at all, not someone who carried trays and answered orders. She felt like herself, the person who had dreamed in secret, who had lived quietly, who had let music be her friend, her companion, and her escape. She felt free, and in that freedom, she realized something she had never allowed herself to hope. People were listening, and they were hearing her. Truly hearing her? When the final note faded, the cafe was silent for a heartbeat. Then the applause began. Soft at first, hesitant, as if people were unsure they were allowed to react, then growing louder, stronger, more insistent. Customers rose from their chairs, clapping and cheering. Some were on their feet, eyes shining, voices filled with excitement and admiration. She felt her hands shake, not from fear, but from the rush of emotion, the realization that she had done something extraordinary, that her secret world had touched the world outside. A few people came forward, offering compliments, asking how long she had been playing, and expressing disbelief at what they had just heard. She smiled, feeling both embarrassed and proud, trying to answer politely, her mind racing. She had never expected this. She had never imagined that anyone would react like this. For so long, she had been invisible, unnoticed, a background figure in a world that moved without her. Now she had stepped into the light, and the light had welcomed her with open arms, even as the applause continued. She noticed the subtle details, the way a tip had been left larger than usual, the way someone had recorded her performance on their phone, the way a few people exchanged glances of admiration. It was a moment of recognition she had never experienced before, a validation of all the years she had spent quietly, secretly, and tirelessly practicing. It was not just music. It was proof that she mattered, that her talent mattered, that her existence could inspire attention and respect. The manager approached her, his face a mixture of relief, astonishment, and pride. "I had no idea," he said simply. "You're incredible, truly," she nodded, still catching her breath, trying to let the words sink in. He was right. She had no idea herself how much she could affect people until this moment. The cafe felt different now, alive in a way it had never been. People who had once ignored her were now looking at her with new eyes. They had seen something real, something genuine, something powerful. She returned to her duties after the performance, carrying trays and refilling cups, but the atmosphere in the cafe had changed. People smiled at her in a new way, asked questions with genuine interest, and sometimes paused to comment on the music. She had stepped into a space that had always felt ordinary, and she had transformed it, even if just for a few hours. The experience was intoxicating, and she could not stop thinking about what had happened, how it had felt, and what it might mean for her future. That night, when she finally returned to her apartment, she sat at her small keyboard and replayed the memory in her mind. She tried to reproduce every note, every chord, every feeling. She realized something. The music that had always belonged only to her private world could now exist outside it. She could share it. She could let it live. And perhaps, if she dared, it could change her life. For the first time in years, she felt a mixture of hope and fear. The hope that her dreams might not be so distant, and the fear that this new attention could bring challenges she had never faced. But as she pressed her fingers against the keys, letting the melodies flow, she realized that she did not care about the fear. For the first time, she had seen what was possible when she let herself be seen. And she knew deep inside that this was only the beginning. The next morning, she woke up with a strange mix of excitement and anxiety. The memory of last night's performance lingered like a soft echo in her mind. The applause, the faces of the customers. The way the cafe had shifted when she played, it all felt unreal, like a dream she could barely touch. She lay in her bed for a few moments, staring at the ceiling, trying to process what had happened. She had always known that music was important to her, but until now, she had never realized how powerful it could be when shared with others. Even as she got ready for work, she could feel her heart racing. Every movement felt heightened, as if the world around her was sharper, brighter, more aware. She put on her uniform, laced her shoes tightly, and grabbed her bag. But she could not shake the nervous energy inside her. What would today be like? Would people talk about her performance? Would anyone remember? Or had it been just a fleeting moment in their lives? When she arrived at the cafe, the atmosphere had already begun to change. The manager greeted her with a smile that was broader than usual, and his tone carried an unusual warmth. "I think you made a lot of people very happy last night," he said casually, though his eyes betrayed how impressed he truly was. She smiled politely, nodding, unsure how to respond. Compliments still felt strange, especially when she had spent so long being invisible. Customers who had been there the night before glanced at her with curiosity, some even whispering to each other. She caught snippets of conversation, that waitress at the piano. "And did you see her hands? Incredible." Her chest tightened with a mixture of pride and anxiety. People were finally noticing her, and it was both thrilling and overwhelming. For years she had worked quietly, blending into the background. Now the background itself seemed to shift. She was suddenly part of the foreground. Her coworkers were equally astonished. They approached her with questions, some playful, some serious. "How long have you been playing?" one asked, leaning casually against the counter. She shrugged, trying to keep her answer simple. "A long time," she said softly, feeling self-conscious. She had spent years practicing in secret, and now the private world she had carefully protected had spilled into public view. The thought made her stomach flutter. The day passed slowly, each customer adding to the growing sense that something had changed. People who had once ignored her now smiled, lingered, and complimented her service. Some even asked if she would play again, though most of them did not know she could play so well. Every request, every curious glance, felt like a small test, and she navigated it with cautious confidence. She was still a waitress, still carrying trays and refilling cups. But now there was an added layer to her presence, an unspoken acknowledgement that she was more than just her job. By the time the lunch rush ended, the cafe manager called her aside. "I've been getting messages and calls," he said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "Someone recorded your performance last night. It's going viral." She froze, her mind racing. She had imagined this moment many times in private, but now it was happening without her control. People she had never met were watching her, listening to her, judging her, and she had no idea what they would think. Her hands trembled slightly, but she nodded. "I didn't expect that," she said honestly, her voice barely above a whisper. She had always been careful to keep her talent hidden, safe in the quiet corners of her life. Now it was exposed, spreading through the world faster than she could have imagined. The rest of the day became a blur. Notifications appeared on her phone, constantly messages from friends, strangers, even people offering opportunities she had never dreamed of. Some wanted to interview her. Others invited her to play at local events. She felt both excited and terrified. Every message seemed to carry a weight she had never carried before. She had to make choices, decisions that could shape her life in ways she was not yet ready to understand. Despite the growing attention, there were challenges she had not anticipated. Not everyone reacted positively. Some people questioned why a waitress could play so well, making remarks that were dismissive or condescending. "It's just a one-time thing," one person commented online. "She probably has no real training." The words stung, and for the first time she felt the heavy weight of public scrutiny. It was easy to ignore the world when no one noticed her. Now everyone noticed, and not all of them were kind. Even so, she refused to let the negativity take over. She reminded herself of the feeling she had when her fingers touched the keys. The moment when the music filled the cafe and silenced the room, that was real. That was hers. She focused on that truth, letting it guide her through the day. Every glance, every comment, every recording that circulated online reminded her that she had something special. That specialness could not be taken away by doubt or judgment. As the days passed, she began to see the ripple effects of her performance. People who had never spoken to her now sought her out, curious about her life and her talent. Some customers came back just to watch her move through the cafe, hoping for another hint of the magic they had witnessed the first time. The staff treated her differently as well, showing respect that had previously been absent, perhaps even a little awe. It was a new world, unfamiliar but exhilarating. She found herself thinking more and more about what was possible. She had spent years limiting herself, holding back, believing that her talent had no place outside her small apartment. Now she realized that the world could respond in ways she had never imagined. Opportunities were no longer just dreams, they were tangible, real, and waiting for her to take them. But with that realization came fear. She had always been cautious, and stepping into this new reality meant risk. People could be cruel, and failure could feel catastrophic. She had to be brave in ways she had never been before. Late one evening, after the cafe had emptied and the lights were dimmed, she sat at the piano once again. The keys were familiar now, warm under her fingers. She played slowly, carefully, letting the music reflect the whirlwind of emotions inside her. Each note carried her doubts, her excitement, her fear, and her hope. It was a private performance for herself, but also a way to process everything that had happened in the past days. She realized that music was no longer just a secret. It was a bridge between who she had been and who she could become. In the following week, she faced new experiences she had never imagined. Invitations to play at small gatherings, local events, and even a school fundraiser began to arrive. Each request brought excitement and anxiety. She carefully considered each one, weighing the possibility of exposure against the thrill of performing. Slowly, she began to say yes. She was ready to step into the world that had suddenly opened to her. Even if it was terrifying, her family and close friends noticed a change in her demeanor. She moved with a quiet confidence, a subtle glow that had not been there before. She no longer felt invisible. Her work at the cafe remained important, but it was now accompanied by a sense of purpose, a recognition that her life could include more than survival. She had discovered a way to share her inner world with the outside. It was intoxicating. Even as she embraced the attention, she remained grounded. She remembered the long hours, the quiet nights of practice, and the countless moments when she had believed that no one would ever hear her. Those experiences had shaped her, giving her the resilience and patience she now relied on. She realized that her journey had not begun with the viral video or the performance at the cafe. It had begun years ago. In the solitude of her small room, with nothing but her music and her determination, as the days turned into weeks, she noticed subtle changes in how people treated her. Customers who once overlooked her now greeted her warmly. Some asked if she would play again, their voices tinged with anticipation rather than curiosity. Coworkers who had once been indifferent now offered encouragement and even shared stories of how they had been touched by her music. The world seemed larger, fuller, and more welcoming than it had before. But the change was not just external. She felt it within herself as well. Her confidence grew, not in a flashy or arrogant way, but quietly, steadily, like roots taking hold in fertile soil. She began to imagine possibilities she had never considered, performing on a stage, teaching music, sharing her story with others who felt invisible or unheard. Each day, she pushed a little further, daring herself to believe that her life could be more than she had ever imagined. One afternoon, a customer approached her with a small notebook and a pen. "I hope you don't mind," the person said shyly, "but I wanted to ask for your autograph. Your performance, it changed something for me." She hesitated, then smiled, realizing that the impact of her music extended far beyond her imagination. She signed the notebook carefully, feeling a strange, warm pride. It was a reminder that her talent, her courage, and her willingness to step forward had the power to touch lives, even as recognition grew. She remained careful not to lose herself in the attention. She knew that it could be fleeting, that moments of fame could vanish as quickly as they appeared. She continued to work at the cafe, carrying trays, answering orders, and serving customers with the same quiet dedication as before. But now, there was a difference. She moved through her days with purpose, carrying both her music and her work, knowing that each step, no matter how small, was part of a larger journey. By the end of the week, she realized that life had shifted in ways she could not have anticipated. The cafe was still familiar, her routines were still in place, but the world outside had opened up. People listened when she spoke, valued her presence, and most importantly, she had discovered a sense of self that had long been buried. She had stepped out of the shadows, and the world had responded with attention, respect, and admiration as she walked home that evening. The city lights reflecting on wet pavement, she allowed herself to imagine the future. She could see stages, audiences, classrooms, and people touched by her music. She felt the thrill of possibility and the fear of the unknown intertwining, reminding her that life was now both unpredictable and full of potential. She smiled softly, knowing that the journey had only just begun, and that the choices she made from this moment onward could shape the rest of her life. And in that quiet, reflective walk, she felt a deep certainty. She had found her voice, her place, and her path. The world had finally noticed, but more importantly, she had finally noticed herself. The days after her performance passed in a haze of excitement, confusion, and exhaustion. She had never imagined that one night could change everything so quickly. Messages kept arriving on her phone. Emails she had never checked filled her inbox. Calls came from people she didn't even know. Some offered opportunities to perform at local events. Others wanted interviews. A few were just curious strangers who had seen the video and wanted to say something encouraging. It was overwhelming, and she often didn't know where to start. At work, life had changed too. Customers approached her with smiles, sometimes pausing to compliment her, sometimes asking if she could play again. She felt a mixture of pride and discomfort. She had always been invisible, blending in with the background, and now everyone seemed to be watching. Even her coworkers treated her differently. There was admiration in their eyes. But sometimes there was also envy, and she noticed it quietly. She didn't know how to respond to it, and part of her wished she could go back to the days when she was unnoticed. Despite all this, she tried to stay grounded. She knew that opportunities came with responsibility, and that if she wanted to make the most of this, she would need to make careful choices. Some offers were genuine, others less so. A few people seemed interested only in profit or attention, and she realized quickly that she needed to be cautious. She had stepped into the world, but the world was not always kind. She could not afford to lose herself in it. One afternoon, she received an invitation to play at a small local theater. It was a chance to perform in front of a larger audience than she had ever imagined, and her heart leapt at the idea. But with excitement came fear. She had never performed outside the cafe, never in front of a crowd this size. What if she made a mistake? What if people laughed, criticized, or ignored her? Her fingers itched to play, but her mind trembled at the thought of being exposed on such a scale. She spent hours thinking about it, weighing the possibilities. The practical side of her mind reminded her of her responsibilities, bills to pay, shifts to work, the routines she had always relied on. The emotional side reminded her of the feeling she had experienced at the cafe. The thrill of the applause, the recognition that had made her feel alive. It was a difficult choice, but deep inside, she knew that if she wanted to grow, she had to take the risk. The evening of the performance arrived. She felt a tension in her chest that she could not shake. The theater was small, but packed with people. The stage lights bright and the seats filled with strangers. Backstage, she watched performers move around with practiced confidence, and she felt both admiration and intimidation. She reminded herself of the hours she had spent alone, the countless moments of practice and self-doubt, and the courage it had taken to even play at the cafe. This was only another step, another moment to face her fears. When it was her turn, she walked onto the stage slowly, feeling the weight of expectation in the air. The lights were bright, the audience silent. The piano in front of her looked larger and more intimidating than any she had ever played. Her fingers hovered over the keys, trembling slightly, and for a moment she considered walking away. But then she closed her eyes and remembered the feeling she had the first time she let her music fill a room, the thrill, the freedom, the connection. That memory steadied her. She began to play. The first notes were quiet, cautious, testing the space and the audience. Then, gradually, her confidence grew. She let the music flow, adding emotion and intensity to each chord. The audience responded immediately. Conversations stopped, eyes widened. And the room seemed to fall into a kind of hush that made her feel like the music itself had taken control. For the first time, she realized how powerful it could feel to touch people's hearts with something she had created. The applause that followed was louder and longer than she had expected. People rose to their feet, clapping and cheering. She felt a rush of emotion she had never known. For years, she had been cautious, hidden, afraid of being judged. Now, every note, every pause, every melody she played had reached people in a way that was profound and undeniable. She smiled, tears threatening to spill. She realized that she had stepped into a world she had once only dreamed about. But success came with complications she had not anticipated. After the performance, she began receiving requests that were difficult to manage. Some wanted her to play at events that conflicted with her shifts at the cafe. Others offered opportunities that seemed too good to be true, and she worried about exploitation. She realized that the attention she had gained carried responsibility and risk. She had to navigate it carefully, balancing her obligations with her desires, protecting herself while embracing the opportunities before her. The pressure also affected her personally. She noticed the strain on her relationships, the subtle tension with coworkers, and even the way her family seemed unsure how to respond. People admired her, yes, but they also questioned her choices, doubted her readiness, or expected too much. She struggled to find balance, to honor her commitments while pursuing her dreams. The freedom she had found through music now required discipline, decision-making, and courage she had never had to use before. Amid all this, she also faced her inner doubts. At night, she replayed performances in her mind, worrying about mistakes, imagining criticism, and questioning whether she was truly ready for the next step. She remembered the hours she had spent hidden away, the years of practice, the private moments when she had believed in herself alone. She realized that the fear of exposure, the fear of failure, and the fear of being seen were all part of the process. To grow, she would have to embrace these fears, not let them control her. She began to structure her days differently. Mornings were spent at the cafe, maintaining her routine and responsibilities. Afternoons became moments of practice, preparation, and reflection. Evenings were sometimes filled with small performances, interviews, or meetings with people who could help her take the next step. It was exhausting, but she learned to pace herself, to find strength in the rhythm she had built through years of quiet dedication. One afternoon, a local music teacher approached her after a small performance at a community center. "You have talent," the teacher said simply, his eyes serious. "But talent alone is not enough. You need training, guidance, and experience if you want to grow." She listened carefully, Realizing that while her natural ability had opened doors, she now faced the challenge of refining it, of learning to navigate a world where skill alone was not enough. It was humbling, but it was also motivating. She took lessons, began studying more deliberately, and experimented with styles and techniques she had never tried before. Each practice session became both a challenge and a joy. Mistakes were inevitable, but she learned to see them as part of the process, not as signs of failure. With each note, she gained confidence, skill, and understanding. She realized that growth was not instantaneous. It was gradual, requiring patience, persistence, and courage. Meanwhile, the public's attention continued to grow. Social media posts, videos, and messages kept spreading her performances, attracting more people, more invitations, and more scrutiny. She had to learn to handle both praise and criticism with grace. Not everyone would understand her journey, and not every opportunity would be right for her. She began to trust her instincts more, making choices that aligned with her values, her comfort, and her vision for the future. Even as her world expanded, she remained connected to her roots. She continued to work at the cafe, valuing the routines, the human connections, and the simplicity of her earlier life. She remembered the quiet moments, the solitude of her practice, and the small victories that had brought her to this point. These memories grounded her, reminding her of who she was, where she had come from, and why she had worked so hard to get here. She also began mentoring others in small ways, sharing advice, encouragement, and support with people who showed interest in music. She remembered the mentors she had never had, the guidance she had lacked, and the kindness she had longed for. Now,